Hello and welcome to the Warframe tier list. Today we'll be going over Equinox. Please bear with me as this video will be all over the place as there is a lot to talk about. Alright, first things first, let's go into the builds. So I tested 6 different builds with Equinox. The first two that I will talk about are the 2 Nightform builds. So the first one is just a Roar build replacing the 1, and all of these builds we replace the 1 because the 6th build I tried was a hybrid build using her augments such as Duality and Energy Transfer. However, it just simply doesn't work as you waste way too much time double casting the 1 and reactivating your 3 and your 4 if you're not using Energy Transfer. Unfortunately, I think both of these augments should be base functionality because they don't really do too much and they kind of just seem like band-aids to be able to play the frame how she was intended to be played, but instead you have to waste 2 mod slots on them and it just is not worth it. Duality just dies every 2 seconds, it doesn't last long enough, and like I said, you just have to cast way too many abilities that have way too long of cast times for it to ever be worth it. So the first 2 Nightform builds that I will be talking about are running health, tank, shield gate setups. How we are shield gating is by reaching 300% strength from Molt Augmented, Moderai, and Growing Power. With all of these buffs up, we will have 302% strength, making it so every time we kill an enemy with our 4 active, we get 75 shield back. Why this is so good is because this means as long as you are consistently killing enemies, you will always get your shield gate and you will not die. Even if you fail to kill an enemy, you will also still have a lot of health, a decent bit of armor, and adaptation stacks to keep you alive. This does not scale forever. About an hour into mod on the Steel Path, it was getting a little rough, but before that, I felt completely invincible. Our other form of survivability is coming from Peaceful Provocation, giving us an AoE slow similar to Gloom, and also lowering the enemy's damage that they are dealing to us, stacking with adaptation and our high health pool. It is very, very efficient. The 2 is very good. It can be used on the Acolytes to pretty much, there's nothing else to really say. You just use them on the Acolyte. They stand still. They don't fight back. It's extremely cheesy, especially with Peaceful Provocation. Like, the Acolytes are a complete joke. And then Roar, just to give us a bit of extra damage to help us scale our damage up into the later levels. I am running Stretch, however, you will have to play with your range and adjust as necessary. In certain tile sets, having too much range on your Pacify and Provoke will be a detriment, as the enemies will just be getting slowed from too far away, lowering your kills per minute. As for the second build, I was running Dispensary. This was solely because the Roar build, its sustain was a bit iffy. So if you find yourself having sustain issues, try running this build instead. It is the same exact concept. If you're still having sustain issues on this build, turn Streamline from Streamline to Fleeting Expertise. So that's all for the night builds, and now let's talk about the day builds. So the day builds, I tried 3 different builds. The first one is just simply Terrify. We are full stripping. We have fully buffed from our 3 and Mold Augmented and Moderai. We have 220% strength and 220% range. This build is really good for killing enemies. However, the sustain is super iffy and we can't really get more. And also, the survivability is also really iffy, but that kind of just comes with playing Dayform. Dayform is unbelievably squishy, and it made me want to tear my hair out. Now let's talk about the 4th build, the other Dayform build. This is a Gloom build, which is similar to her Nightform, except for we are shield gating via abilities instead of killing enemies, and we keep the 4 nuke. How we are shield gating on this build and why this build also made me want to tear my hair out is we are shield gating with her too. Why is this a problem? Well, to cast her too, you have to target an enemy. The problem with this is when you target an enemy, if you already casted the 2 on it, you cannot recast it on them. So you will just try to cast it on them, nothing will happen, and then you'll die. Or, if the enemy's an Eximus, or is affected by an Ancient Healer, they'll have Overguard, and you'll try to cast it on them, nothing will happen, and you'll just die. The survivability on Dayform builds is absolutely terrible, but there's nothing you can really do about it, so you just have to suck it up, and if you really like Dayform, you just have to, that's it, you just have to suck it up. The 5th build I tried was another Dayform build, and it was pretty much these exact same mods, but with pillage. Instead of Brief Respite, I was using Corrosive Projection, and this gives you 318% strength when fully buffed, meaning you are 10% strength off of full stripping with pillage. What does that mean? That means that one single red archon shard would make your pillage with this build full strip. So if you want to try the pillage build, you can try it. This is the loadout. You cannot run efficiency because then you won't be able to shield gate. Because again, you have to take Brief Respite off for Corrosive Projection. That's all for the builds. Now let's talk about the rest of the loadout. So, your primary is, surprise surprise, you are a gun frame, is your AoE weapon of choice. I was using the Toncore. You can use whatever AoE weapon you like. If you're using an armor strip build or the roar build, you can also opt for the Vermisplicer, which I talked about in the Rhino video. As for your secondary, I was using the Nucore for a primer and also for helping deal with the nullifiers. Alternatively, you can use the Epitaph for priming and use your melee weapon for dealing with the nullifiers. If you use your melee weapon for killing the nullifiers, I would suggest running a weapon that has very high range. And then there is, of course, your pet. We are running the Panzer with the standard build equipped with the synth mods. Alright, now moving on to the rankings, we will be discussing Equinox and related to 4 topics: her kills per minute, her survivability, her viability in the different game modes, and how fun she is to play. All of this data was sampled from a 1-hour solo Steel Path MOT run with no specters and no on-call. For Equinox, I did multiple runs with multiple different builds, but for sake of discussion, I will just separate it into day and night form. So, her night form kills per minute is pretty okay, but it lacks scaling. All you have is roar and nothing else. You don't have any form of armor strip, and you are entirely relying on your guns. That being said, your secondary, if you opt for the Nucore, you don't have to run any auger mods, so you get to run a full DPS Nucore, which is actually pretty good, especially with roar. Outside of that, you're entirely relying on your primary AoE weapon, and the second that stops being able to kill the enemies that you're fighting, your kills per minute goes down significantly. The second it takes more than one shot to kill an enemy, your kills per minute significantly drops. In just 1 hour content though, it doesn't really matter. Without roar, it matters a little bit. Up to an hour, you will notice your KPM slowly dropping over the course of the hour without roar. With roar, you'll still pretty much one-shot everything, so it's okay. But past 1 hour, even with roar, it significantly drops. With dayform, it's not much better. I honestly believe that dayform actually has worse KPM than nightform, while solo at least, because you're just constantly spamming abilities to stay alive with shield gating, and your 4 cast time takes 27 years. I do not understand why her 4 takes so long to cast. It takes so long to cast where even with Moderai, for the 50% cast speed, you will still die in the cast animation. It takes so long. I don't know how you can use a room-wide nuke that just instantly kills everything within 30 meters of you, and then press the ability a millisecond later and die in the cast time of it. Like, it takes so long. Of course, you could fix that with archon shards, but it's a bit cursed because Nightform Equinox really does not care about cast speed. So if you use cast speed archon shards, it doesn't really do anything for Nightform build, but if you don't care about Nightform build, then I guess that's fine. But for the sake of discussion and for what I personally experienced, I think that Nightform is actually better because you don't have to worry about staying alive, you just run around shooting your guns. So for the KPM, I will be using the Nightform KPM, which, while the KPM was decent enough to be an A, you have absolutely no scaling, so I will give it a flat B. Now, moving on to her survivability. Again, there's a vast difference between day and night. Day form has absolutely terrible survivability. It is god awful. Like, staying alive in a day form build is so unbelievably hard because, as I mentioned earlier, the only way that you can shield gate is by pressing her 2, which is a targeted ability. And if the enemy's already affected by it, you can't recast it. If the enemy's in Eximus, you can't cast it on them. If the enemy happens to have Overguard, you can't cast it on them. And all of those situations lead you to just instantly dying with nothing you can do about it. If you go for Pillage or Terrify, it's okay, but then you have to shield gate even more because you're not slowing the enemies and you have sustain issues. Again, you might be able to fix it with Archon shards with either energy max shards or energy pickup shards, and that might work, but I don't have the shards to put in, and I also do not like testing Warframes with Archon shards. That feels extremely cursed and unfair. Now Nightform, her survivability is just really good. Um, Up until an hour in Mott, I felt completely invincible, but the last 5 minutes was getting pretty difficult to stay alive. But before that, it was really easy. So, for night form, if you plan staying past an hour, I would say that the day form will eventually actually get better survivability. As weird as that sounds, just because you're relying on shield gating rather than a tank build. The night form is also relying on shield gating, yes, but it is determined by your kills. So whenever your kill starts to slow down, your shield gate starts to slow down, and then you can start dying. You could probably run a night form build running an ability that you could shield gate off of as well, like Pillage. But again, similar to the day form build, you would need energy regen Archon shards to sustain it. And I don't know how many you would need. You would probably need a lot. So for her overall survivability, given that there's so many flaws in it, but it's fine up until an hour, again, I'll have to go kind of average here at just a B. Now, moving on to her viability, this is where she really falls off. So what I mean by viability is there any content where she actually excels in, and is there any content where she actively does bad at? Unfortunately, Equinox has absolutely no content where she actually excels in compared to another Warframe, and everything else she's either below average or just average. Like for example, she doesn't really do anything in an exterminate. You're better off just running a thermal sunder frame. And then yes, you could take thermal sunder on Equinox, but why? Like, there's multiple other frames that could do that and just be better at it, like Volt or Titania or Garuda. Um, as for survival, again, she's okay at it, and she's pretty fun. Like, she's definitely average at survival, but definitely nothing special, and your team might get annoyed at you for running a slow if you're running Nightform, or Gloom if you're running the Gloom Dayform build. Uh, Disruption, I would not run her in Disruption. She's way too squishy. Defense, she might be okay as like a supplementary nuker in defense, but again, you're relying on other people. Excavation, she can't do. Um, and the other mission types don't really matter, I wouldn't use her in bounties. The only thing that there's a real reason to use Equinox for is so niche, and you will only ever do it once in your life, that it's not even worth bringing up. But I will anyway. The only use case that Equinox legitimately has is scanning Kavats on Deimos to get your genetic codes. That is the only reason to actually play Equinox other than another frame, other than you just liking Equinox. So for her overall viability, I will have to give her a C-. Now, moving on to the final topic of how fun she is to play. Again, this is always subjective, and I actually don't find her super boring, but I also don't find her super interesting either. She's not bad, and like, I don't know. I actually don't know what it is about her, because I would generally think that a Warframe that plays like this, like with Gloom, is boring, but there's just something about her that doesn't seem that bad. I think it's her her on-kill shield gain, and then so you're pretty much permanently invincible as long as you're killing, so it's fun like trying to upkeep your kills. You're basically just trying to out DPS the enemies, because if you start failing to get your kills, you die. So it's kind of like a race. That's pretty fun. And then Dayform, I guess you have a large AoE nuke, even though it's super unreliable, and half the times you cast it, whenever it has 3 million charges, it won't kill a Lancer 2 feet from you. I don't know what's up with the ability. I swear it just doesn't kill some enemies for no reason. But at the same time, it's not the most interesting. It's definitely average at best. So I will give her fun a C+. In conclusion, Equinox is a C+ tier frame. With that being said, she does fill a few niches, such as being a good utility frame for the team if you're playing Night Form, as she has an AoE slow to keep people alive. She gives 75 shield back to the entire team to keep everybody alive, and her 2 pretty much turns high priority targets into non-threats, such as acolytes. Dayform also has the niche of giving her squad plus 50% ability strength. So if you ever run into a situation where someone on your team needs extra ability strength to reach a threshold, then that is good for that. She's also a supplementary nuker. If you have another nuker on your team, then she will be able to use her 4 to also wipe the room more often. But outside of that, there's not too much to say. She could be B tier very easily if she just got a very slight buff or rework, such as them making energy transfer a base functionality part of her kit, or them significantly lowering the cast time on her 1 so it's more seamless, because it takes way too long to switch between forms, and her 4 also has a super long cast time. But outside of that, I believe that she sits firmly at the top of C tier.